I'm Scott, and this is a review. On today's episode, which is episode 46, I'll be reviewing Vice. Vice stars, I was going to say Dick Cheney, Vice stars Christian Bale as Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney, former Vice President of the United States, thank God. And it's written and directed by Adam McKay, who you guys will probably recognize as the writer-director of Anchorman, Talladega Nights, Step Brothers. He was a producer on Eastbound and Down. Like, this guy, basically Will Ferrell's director partner, right? And this movie's been getting a lot of buzz because Christian Bale, once again, has physically transformed his body. He gained a lot of weight. Basically, I think that's all he did, is gained a lot of weight, to look very strikingly similar to Dick Cheney, who was obviously George W. Bush's vice president, and kind of famously did all kinds of that. I mean, like, famously is a war criminal, basically started the Iraq war for no reason other than the fact that his oil company and other oil companies he was in bed with wanted to get the oil out of Iraq. It's a whole thing. So, yeah, you know, I think this is a perfect movie for somebody my age. I kind of grew up under the shadow of 9/11, which is obviously the biggest kind of event that led to Dick Cheney's, shall we say, rise of power. I kind of gave him the opportunity with the country panicking to get away with a lot. And this is Adam McKay's I can't talk today. This is Adam McKay's follow-up to The Big Short, which was nominated for an Oscar in 2015. And I think that he had a lot to live up to with this movie. I personally haven't seen The Big Short. It wasn't something I was super interested in. It looked great, but just the subject matter. And I have a little bit more experience with this subject matter here in Vice, so obviously I was a little bit more interested. And I have to say, I'm a little disappointed. So where to begin? Christian Bale obviously is the biggest selling point of this movie, and he does look just like Dick Cheney. He sounds pretty similar to him. He nails Dick Cheney. Like, it really is an incredible transformation. But I don't really feel like we ever really get inside of Dick Cheney. I mean, maybe, not that anyone would want to do that, but like as a character, I don't know. It feels like they really kind of just build him up to be like more of a legend than they allow him to be in the movie. Like, they kind of make Dick Cheney out to be this Machiavellian-esque, like, genius, which I'm sure, like, to a certain degree, he was, and he got away with a lot of crazy shit during that time period. But the movie kind of just shows lots of instances of him just kind of like sitting back with a lot of idiots in the room and just kind of, well, let's just do this. And then they're like, okay, yeah. There's not really like a lot of push and pull between him and a lot of characters. It's just kind of a lot of different scenes where he's in a room with somebody that's stupider than he is. And the thing is, for me anyways, is watching this movie, I felt like Dick Cheney himself isn't that smart of a character, at least the way they're portraying him in this movie. Like, they never really go out of their way to show you how he's such this legendary genius, this mysterious figure that we don't know. It's like, yeah, he's enigmatic, but like, we don't get inside his head enough to really understand his motivations. And I think the first half of this movie is kind of a mess, frankly. It starts off with his years kind of working his way up in the White House, first working in the Nixon administration for Donald Rumsfeld, played by Steve Carell. And which I think Steve Carell is fine. He's supposed to be older than Dick Cheney in the context of the movie, I believe, or in real life he is. But he just, I don't know. Christian Bale just always looks older. His Dick Cheney just looks older than Steve Carell. I don't know which one of those guys, actually, the actors, are older or not, but I guess Steve Carell is older, but he's been in comedy for so long, and Christian Bale's so serious, you just kind of think he's older for some reason. And Steve Carell looks really young. But I thought he was okay, and that's the movie's kind of scattershot. Like, it kind of just hops around here and there. Like, you get a little bit of Dick Cheney being a drunk back in the college days, then it hops to 9/11 and him reacting to 9/11. Then it hops backwards to him working in the Nixon administration and kind of reacting to stuff there. And it kind of just loses narrative cohesion after a while. Like, I really felt lost in certain ways. Like, I couldn't connect the dots all the time as to where this was going, even though I know where this is going because it's real life history. But that being said, I think once they finally do, and it takes about half the movie, finally get to Dick Cheney being vice president for George Bush, or George W. Bush, and kind of the whole Iraq war debacle, or whatever you want to call it, I think that's where the movie gets interesting. And there's definitely little sparks here and there that are really interesting. Like, there's a point about halfway through the movie when it starts rolling credits and like wrapping up the movie, it's like, and Dick Cheney never was in politics again. And then it's like a hard cut to him getting a phone call from George W. Bush. And then the movie continues. There's little sprinkled in bits here and there that are really clever like that. But going back to the lack of narrative cohesion, it's also a structural cohesion that's kind of missing. Like, it kind of feels incongruent. Like, Adam McKay is just kind of riffing different styles, and he never quite lands on something. Like, there's a really neat sequence where he's kind of showing Dick Cheney, kind of setting the staff at the White House. And they do it by showing, like, a Monopoly board and showing kind of like, here's the White House. It's showing, like, all the different real-life characters that are in play here. And then they'd be rolling the dice and showing how Dick Cheney's all over the board. But I felt like that was a really cool little thing, and they could have kept going with it, but it's only that one scene. And there's lots of little visual neat things like that they kind of will do one time and then drop it. And some of them I really liked. Most of them I really liked. But it just felt like there wasn't a solid direction that the movie was going in. And I would say with the story itself, once again, we all know how the story ends, or, where it goes in the context of the movie, but it was just missing something that kind of linked everything together. And I think that kind of goes back to the fact that we don't really get into Dick Cheney's head, and we're kind of kept at a distance to a certain degree, which I think is kind of a detriment to the movie, because I think that even with a apprehensible character like Dick Cheney, and this movie makes no bones about trying to make him out to be a good guy. Like, this, Adam McKay very clearly has a negative opinion about Dick Cheney, and that's very, very fluent in the movie. But even having an evil character like that, you want to see from their perspective. You want to be able to identify with why they're doing these evil things. And it's kind of set in the very beginning that he just is fascinated with the idea of power and how the president can do stuff behind closed doors and ignore Congress. So it's like he's just attracted to the dark side of politics from the very beginning. But we don't know why. We don't know why he wants to control things. There's not really, there's not really a good reason for that. But, like I said, there's still a lot of fun stuff throughout the movie. I did find some of it to be a little bit ham-fisted. I think this movie is very on the nose in certain degrees, and it just gets a little bit too in your face. And I found this movie to be sort of pretentious in a way that was causing me to roll my eyes quite often, actually. We also have Jesse Plemons in this movie, who I don't think a lot of people know that he's in this movie. If you don't know who that is, he's most notably Creepy Todd from Breaking Bad, aka Meth Damon. He's also in Fargo. He's a great character in season 2 of Fargo. This is a great character actor. I love him in everything he's in, and he's the narrator in this movie. And they keep having this guy in different situations, and it's very meta, where they have him kind of breaking the fourth wall and talking directly to the audience. And there's a point in which he's fighting in the Iraq War, and you don't know if it's just supposed to be like this omniscient thing, or if it's like is this character actually supposed to be fighting in the Iraq War? And then it's finally revealed in like the final 20 minutes of the movie who this character is. And it's not somebody that's like, it's not who you would expect. And I don't even think it's like a real life. It's like it's weird. I don't want to spoil it. It's kind of a spoiler to say who this character ends up being. But yeah, it kind of ends with, it goes through the whole Iraq war bit, and the movie kind of ends on the note of Dick Cheney getting the heart transplant. He almost dies. He gets a heart transplant, and they have this wonderful little sequence, once again on the nose, but I still kind of enjoyed it, where it's a montage of cutting to like George W. Bush and Colin Powell and like all these different people and Donald Rumsfeld and all these people that were really negatively affected by Dick Cheney's actions, and it's intercut with just the overhead shot of the hole in his chest as they've removed Dick Cheney's heart, and there's literally, he has no heart, and they keep flashing. It's cut between that and all the different people, and it's footage of the Iraq war and all this. Once again, it's very on the nose, but I found it to be a fun little sequence, and that was another one of those little bits that were smattered in there that really made me kind of hope for more of this movie. Some of the other great performances here, we've got Amy Adams as Lynn Cheney. Like I mentioned, Steve Carell as Donald Rumsfeld. You've got Sam Rockwell as George W. Bush, which I think is some of the most inspired casting of all time. You've got Shea Whigham. I have to mention in every review, Shea Whigham is Dick Cheney's father. Tyler Perry is Colin Powell. You got Allison Pill plays Dick Cheney's daughter. And so, yeah, you got a great cast in here. I think all the performances are phenomenal. I think this is definitely an actor's kind of movie. It just, once again, all these things that I liked about it, it's sad because I think there could have been a lot more. I think that if that Adam McKay would have, gotten his head out of his own ass a little bit and kind of toned it down a little bit with the like trying to be so I don't know what's the word. You know what I mean? He's just trying way too hard, just in general, just every sense of the word of trying too hard. And I think that it kind of takes away from what could have been a very interesting and disturbing story of American history. But that being said, it is great to see this all recontextualized in the year 2018, kind of being able to look back at all of it as a singular series of events. Because when you're I remember living through a lot of this stuff, and it didn't seem like, you don't, and they even mentioned this in the movie, how you kind of are blind to all these evil events that are happening in our world until they're kind of set before you in a history book or a movie or a TV show or in something that takes it and just kind of lays it out for you in more simple terms. And I think that's a really great part of this movie. And I think that another great takeaway for a lot of people to watch this movie is just to kind of see how things are behind the scenes. And obviously this is it's a take on what could be going on. We don't know for a fact. They even addressed in the beginning that a lot of this stuff is kind of speculation, and they said they tried their fucking best, literally, to do this. And I do think that it seems like a genuinely good look at the inside locker room of how politics works in our country, especially since 9/11. And I think that it really does show how Dick Cheney is kind of the core of that change. He's kind of the reason that change has happened, and it kind of paints a picture of how we've gotten to where we are today with our politics and just kind of how fucked up our world is now. Yeah, so this is definitely a mixed bag because I feel like every other sentence I'm like, I don't like this. However, I do like this. And it's definitely where I end up on this movie, is very mixed bag. I did find myself quite bored for a lot of this. There's a lot of just people talking in a room about stuff, and sometimes you don't know what they're talking about. I mean, you might. I didn't. Some of it was a little bit too inside baseball, I think, and overall, I think we were missing that piece of the story that would have kind of linked everything together. We were missing an interpersonal connection to Dick Cheney Because even if you don't like a character, I always go back to Nightcrawler, Lou Bloom. He is an evil character, but you follow him, you're into his story, and by the end of the movie, you're on the edge of your seat, regardless of the fact that you're rooting for or rooting against an absolute deplorable human being, which could have applied perfectly for Dick Cheney, who is definitely a deplorable human being. He's an absolute ghoul. But unfortunately, this movie kind of just paints him as that from the get-go, and he just becomes even more lizard-like as the movie goes on. So yeah, I think out of 10, I would give Vice. Ooh, I'm at like a 6 right now. I think I'm gonna give it 6 heart transplants out of 10. Definitely want to see what Adam McKay is gonna do next, but I think he might have been smelling his own ass a little bit after the success of The Big Short. So hopefully this will humble the man a little bit, and we'll get something that is a perfect mesh of the two in his next project. So yeah, this has been our review of Vice. Definitely a disappointment. I was looking forward to this. Is one of the biggest, highest on my list of anticipation this year for movies. So definitely a letdown for me. And yeah, hope you guys aren't sick of just hearing my sultry, dulcet tones. But all the boys are out of town for the holidays. That's just me here, and this is a Review Studios by my lonesome. Our next review, they should be back, or at least Ben or TJ, one of the two. We'll be talking about Aquaman is next on our list. We're going to talk about Bumblebee, hopefully, Bird Box, a couple other movies on the list that I want to get to. Don't want to make any promises, but, we're getting to Oscar season here, so we're going to have to try to catch up with all the big movies. But yeah, as always, I'm Scott, and this has been a review. Thanks for listening.